Welcome to the lab. Today we're making an end-grain walnut cutting board featuring the lab's logo engraved on the top. The build starts by chopping my 8/4 walnut into 24-inch lengths. I cut a thin strip off the end of the board to remove any of the checking. Before I run my boards through the joiner and planer, I mark the faces off with chalk so I visually can tell where the joiner blades have made contact with the material. Once I finish joining my boards, I run them through the planer. I finish squaring up the stock by running the last edge through the table saw. Once my boards are all square, I can go ahead and rip them into strips just over 1.5 inches in width. Once my stock is cut into strips, I mark the faces off that made contact with the table saw blade. That way I can run them through the joiner and planer again. I check all my stock to make sure the pieces are square. Once satisfied my stock is square, I can go ahead and arrange the pieces in a visually interesting way. Currently my stock is a rectangle and I want the shorter edge on the top. Once satisfied with my layout, I mark a triangle on the top so I can put the pieces back in the same order. Time for the glue up. Before starting the glue up, I set my clamps to the approximate length and add some blue tape to keep the glue from sticking to the clamps. When gluing cutting boards together, I use Titebond 3 since it is a waterproof product. I apply a liberal amount to all the pieces except the last one and spread it out with a glue spreader. I don't apply glue on the last part since I don't want glue on my exterior edge. I wipe off the excess glue using a damp paper towel. Once the glue is cured, I can remove the excess with a scraper and chisel. After the majority of the squeeze out is removed, I can join and plane my board. At this point in the build, I go ahead and run my stock through the planer to make sure my squares are actually squares. I install my cross-cutting sled and square up one of the sides. Once my end is square, I go ahead and set up a stop block so I can cross-cut multiple pieces at 1.5 inches. I utilize a reference triangle once again so I can put all my pieces back in order. my final cut, I get rid of the cross-cutting sled and reference the fence. I lay out my pieces using my reference triangle and rotate each piece 90 degrees. After that, I rearrange my pieces to find a pattern that is aesthetically pleasing. Time for the final glue up. I repeat the steps that I did for glue up number 1. I use a mallet to make sure all my pieces are seated at the same level, and I also use a large square to ensure everything is all squared up. I let the cutting board dry overnight and remove it from the clamps. I use a handheld belt sander to level off my board. I don't use the joiner or planer for this step since end grain is tough on the blades, and also there's a good chance that the wood will blow out on the end. I check the flatness of my board by racking it back and forth on a large flat surface. I run my board through the thickness sander to remove any of the deep scratches left by the belt sander. The last step in squaring up my board is running one edge on a belt sander and then ripping the other edge on the table saw. The next step in the build is running through your sandpaper grits. I go from 80 grit all the way through 220. Sanding end grain takes an incredibly long time. I recommend putting on your favorite tunes or podcast. This cutting board is going to live in our shop kitchen, so I decided to include the Labs logo. I used the Shaper Origin, a handheld CNC, to engrave our logo on the cutting board. Time to prep for finish. Before applying finish, I go ahead and spray my cutting board down with some water to raise the grain. Once all the water is evaporated, I go ahead and use a block plane to chamfer the edges slightly. Before I apply my first coat, I use a sanding block with 220 grit to remove the rough spots left from raising the grain. Raising the grain and sanding it down will eliminate the need to sand after your first coat. Once sanded, I use an air gun to remove any dust settled in the pores. For my finish, I use Howard's Butcher Block Conditioner. I cover my piece in the finish, wipe on, and let it soak in. When conditioning a new board, it's recommended that you repeat this step 3 to 4 times. For this particular board, I applied 4 coats. This is the 4th and final coat. And that's it, a walnut end grain cutting board with a custom engraved logo. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time in the lab.